Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to go through the site plan checklist. We have a variety of different checklists when working through the construction documents, and the site plan checklist is one of the first. And Michael's going to go through that checklist and show you how it applies to the project and things to do to complete that checklist. So let's learn.
Hey, this is going through a site plan checklist for a residential project. This specific project is Campground Road Residential. So we're just going to go through the site plan checklist here. Technical guidelines. The first one's follow ADA guidelines for handicap areas and the accessible route. So for residential projects, usually the key spot for ADA is near the mail kiosk, if there is a mail kiosk on the project. So this is where the mail kiosk is proposed for this site. There's not any parking spots shown here now, but this is kind of the rough outline of where the parking is going to be. So there, you just need to make sure that there's a handicap parking spot with an accessible route from the striping in the ADA area to the mail kiosk. B, follow local/state DOT requirements within the right of way. This is the right of way here for a residential project. Different cities and counties have different right of way width requirements and cross section requirements. This is in the city of Atlanta, so they just need to make sure to follow if Atlanta has a cross section for the right of way, their specific requirements. Usually the right of way width is 50 feet. As you can see here, this right of way width is 50 feet. Design checklist. Number 1 is to coordinate with the architect for the building classifications. That's usually something that's required for a commercial project. For the residential project, you would want to make sure to coordinate that the different building footprints for the different lots, and to make sure that that specific building footprint actually fits within the lot and the setback of the site. So like here's one of the parcels on the site here, lot 12, and we would need to make sure that the building footprint that the architect provides fits within the building setbacks. Or we may have to make the lot bigger, or the footprint of the building would have to be smaller. Content checklist. Number 1, verify title block information. That is on the paper space. So if we hop back over to paper space, this is the title block here. So we just want to make sure that the project name, address, the sheet number, and sheet title are all correct. Number 2, show location map. This is the location map or vicinity map. You want to make sure to have it zoomed out or scaled out so that you can see the surroundings, but not so zoomed out that the site's tiny. Like, you don't need to show the entire state of Georgia on the map, but just enough so that you can see the surroundings area. And you also trace the outline of the site and just make sure that your site arrow is pointing to it. Number 3, show site analysis and verify that all information is correct. The site analysis is the table that's usually shown on our preliminary sheet. So you can bring this over to your site plan and you can make it a little bit smaller so it doesn't take up too much of the sheet, and you just want to make sure that this information correlates with the most up-to-date site plan that you're submitting. This table is helpful for reviewers just to go through and get quick information and can review it without having to look all over the place for it. Number 4 is position building layout. So major road is parallel to the bottom of sheet. That can apply to residential and commercial projects. So you can see our main road orientation and the lot orientations follow the orientation of the longest property line. Like, the site's not angled in a diagonal. It's running pretty much north to south, since the site's basically a rectangle. Show zoning and parcel information for adjacent properties. Looks like usually it comes from the survey. It will have the adjacent property owners. most of the time it doesn't say the zoning of the property, so you'll just have to go through and add that by checking the local, the city or the county's GIS. Number 6, label meets and bounds and show all property pins at corners. Show and label the existing and proposed right of way if applicable. So for this residential layout, if we added the meets and bounds to each one of these property lines, it would just it'd get cluttered really fast and you wouldn't be able to read it. So there'll be a separate video of how to make the meets and bounds table that correlates with the lot. It's usually a separate sheet from the site plan, and it will just have like lot 16, and then we'll call out its meets and bounds on the table itself, and all the lots on the site will be included in the table. That's just a separate process. Label each outlot with outlot number, acreage, and meets and bounds. For the residential layout, we always give the lot a number, then you can call out the area on it. This was generated by the parcel creation tool, and just by adding a label style to the parcel itself. So those are all shown on each one of the lots. Show building setback, landscaping strips, and buffers. These need to be labeled, but these are the building setbacks for each lot. There's stream buffers that are labeled, and sometimes there's zoning buffers that need to be labeled. It doesn't look like this site has a zoning buffer. If a site requires a zoning buffer, it's usually because the adjacent property is a less intense zoning and you're proposing a more intense zoning, so you have to provide a buffer between the properties, which will need to be shown on the site plan. Label all buildings with dimensions and square footage. That's more applicable to commercial projects, but sometimes we do show the building footprint itself on the parcel, usually just to make sure that the building fits within the setbacks. Locate each building with bearing and distance. That's also something more related to a commercial project. If you're proposing like a large self-storage building or a car wash, you just want to locate each building corner, or at least 2 building corners, to the nearest property pin. Which, like if this was, let's say this is our building, you would just draw a line from a property corner to the corner of the building, run LP, and then it would give you the bearing and distance that the surveyor would need to shoot, and they would stake this corner, and that's where they would start building the building. They do it on individual lot plans, but we're doing the master grading and site plan, so we're not going to locate each house on this. Number 11, show bollards at building corners if needed. There may be some bollards needed at the mail kiosk. If they're needed, we just need to make sure to show them on the site plan and provide the detail for it. Parking, check local codes and tenant requirements. There may be specific parking requirements for how many spots that are needed at the mail kiosk, but for a residential layout, unless it's townhomes, usually the parking is fine, just provided in the driveway and in the garage. For townhomes, sometimes you would have to provide separate guest parking, since there's sometimes not as much driveway for townhomes. Show handicap parking signs and ramps. For this residential layout, and most of them, again, it's just provided at the mail kiosk, or maybe where a sidewalk gets to like if we had sidewalks proposed here, and you'd have a crosswalk coming across, you'd want to make sure to propose your ADA ramps to get across the street. Dimension, parking layout, and service drives include parking numbers for each row of parking. So to dimension, these roads are dimensions. There's 28-foot dimension there, and you should just dimension it. You see it's dimensioned in a couple spots along each road. so that they don't have to go looking for the one dimension that just happens to be over there if they don't see it. Another thing that you want to dimension on your roads are the radiuses of the drives. So like there's a radius there, so I'm just using the LR command, which stands for label radius. And you always want to put the radius dimension on the inside of the radius and try not to have it like overlap with anything, because that curve tends to print pretty thick. So like there's 171 foot radius there. You do the one over here. You just want to set the rotation to 0. And you would go along to each one of your radius along the road. I'm just setting the rotation to 0 on my properties tab on the other screen. This drawing is a 40 scale, so you would want to set the text height. You do 40 times 0.08, which is 3.2. So I'm just changing the text height over here. So that ensures that it's not too big and not too small. That's just like our standard text height. So like if it was a 20 scale, you would do 20 times 0.08, so it'd be 1.6. But for this, it'd be 40 times 0.08, so I did 3.2. You put the dimensions on the dimension layer, and you would just keep on going along to each curve and labeling the radiuses. I'm not going to show going through and doing every one, but you just keep doing that same process along all the radii. What's the next one? The show limits of asphalt paving schedule, label as normal duty and heavy duty, verify with soil report. So the soil report is referring to the geotech report. The geotech report generally provides pavement recommendations for the site for like thicknesses of the asphalt or the concrete, which our paving legend would need to match whatever that geotech report said. So like it may call out different thicknesses for the concrete or the asphalt, so you need to go in and update that. Usually if I'm not proposing a specific one of these types of pavements, I'll remove that kind of section on the paving schedule so that the contractor doesn't get confused. Each one of the different types of pavement have their own hatch associated with it that would need to match the hatch that you put on the road itself on the site plan. It's like if we were proposing standard duty asphalt pavement, since that's a pretty normal pavement that we propose, there's no hatch associated with it, and that's probably what would be proposed on this site. So if we had standard duty asphalt pavement, you wouldn't need to hatch it, but you go into the site plan, go grab some text over here, standard text block, set the text height to 40 times 0.08, so 3.2, and you would say standard asphalt pavement, and it'd go onto the CS and OneNote layer. You just want it showing up on the site plan, so click the wrong one. And you would want to drop the note around the site, a couple times up and down the roads, just so that it doesn't get missed. Just like that. I have to get on this meeting that just started. I forgot I had it. Alright, so the next one is number 16, show dumpsters in a 10 by 20 open area or 14 by 20 enclosed area. Add bollards if required. For a single family residential layout like this, everyone usually just has their own trash cans that they just roll out to the end of the driveway. So we don't need to show a dumpster on this specific site plan. Next one, show pad mounted transformers. We could coordinate with the power company about where the transformers are most likely going to end up. But usually that's something that's handled during the course of construction. Number 18, show all curb and gutter as triple line and label curb and gutter as 24-inch in parking areas and 30 inches in the right-of-way. This neighborhood, we decided to do roll curb like most neighborhoods typically have. So that's what's indicated by the dashed line instead of the solid curb line that we usually have. There should be a curb and gutter legend on the site plan sheet, as you can see here, so they'll know that it's rolled curb opposed to the standard concrete curb and gutter. If you're proposing roll curb, you'd want to make sure to also include the detail on your site plan, on your site detail sheet. Label all driveways located the nearest property pin and label radiuses at drive cuts. Show directional arrows, stop bars, and stop signs where appropriate. Both of the connections for this site are onto existing roads and subdivisions, it looks like. So we'd want to make sure to provide like specifically some spot elevations here, a note that says to tie into existing curb and gutter. And if there were radiuses on the drive, you'd want to make sure to label those to the nearest property pin and the actual dimension of the radius. Show directional arrow, stop bars, and stop signs where appropriate. Want to make sure to propose some stop signs at intersections. Usually in the neighborhoods, I think we usually just propose stop signs and there's usually not stop bars at the intersections. There'll be like stop signs and crosswalks. Label road and show road center line, widths, and speed limits if available. We don't need to label the speed limit on this road. We're not sure what it's going to be. You could go through and label the center line of the road so if the road's 28 feet all around, you would just offset the face of the curb, 14 feet. I don't know why is this one continuous line that just closes in on itself? Oh, it's 28 feet from the gutter. Sorry, onto the face of the curb. So you'd offset the gutter 14 feet, and you can put that on CS and one note. Must have put it on the wrong layer, says it's turned off. CS and one note. And you can change the line style to whatever you want to use for your center line. I usually use stripe X8 here. And you would just want to put a label on it calling it out as the center line. If it's not generating continuous or equal segments of your line type, you can run PG and then yes for generate continuously. And over on your properties tab, you can change your line type scale to make it generate, like longer line types, or if you want it to have the dashes more frequently. So we'll try like 2. So that looks pretty good for the road center line right there. And you'd want to go through and do the same thing for each road. Show proposed access, grading, or construction easements. Sometimes if your property access is going through, like someone else's property or it's shared, you'd want to label it or propose an easement, which would need to be coordinated with the property owner next door and whoever owns the property that we're working on. There's no easement, no access or grading or construction easements needed for this site, so we don't need to show any of those. Show truck path and adjust curb and radii as necessary. That's typically for a commercial development, like if it's a self-storage facility and you need to get the loading trucks in and out, you need to make sure that those can fit. Or certain retail stores require the WB67 truck, which is just a big tractor trailer truck, and you'd have to make sure that that truck can navigate the site. You wouldn't want to design a site that the truck couldn't navigate. Show pylon signs and other required signage. This neighborhood will most likely have some sort of a sign near the entrance, or since it's connecting to phase 1 of the neighborhood, they may already have some sort of a monument sign up front, but they may want another one here, so we just need to ask the owner. And if the sign needs to be shown, we usually use this block from our table, and you would just plop it down and add the note. It says monument sign designed and permitted by others. We can show the location of the sign, but we don't actually design the sign or permit the sign. You have to pull sign permits for that, and we don't do that. That's handled by other people. Coordinate with architectural plans and building footprint, sidewalk dimension, ramps. So that's like we talked about earlier. We need to make sure that the house footprint can fit within the building setbacks. That should have already been coordinated on the site. I'm assuming it was. So that's good. Retaining walls should be noted. Modular retaining walls to be designed and permitted by the wall contractor and not designed by others. So this site, we have a retaining wall proposed here and a wall that's proposed along that stretch, and looks like there's a wall there as well. So you'll want to make sure that there's a note on the wall just to make sure that it shows that we're not responsible for permitting or designing the wall. It should say that note there. You'd want to point it at each wall. I'm just matching the layer and the style. Since I copied it in from Word, it's associating it as a block for some reason. And then I'd want it to be capitalized, so I just go into here and change it to uppercase. And I think it would look better if it was justified to the left, so I'll just go over to the Properties tab and change that left. And then you'd want to make sure to label each wall. I believe those are all the walls. If a school/athletic project delineate areas to be turf, sometimes we'll show turf on like daycares as well that have like playgrounds. So you'll just want to make sure to show where it's turf opposed to grass, just so that they can price it accurately. Show demolition socket lines on the site plan for reference. It's not going to apply to this project, but if you were trying to, like, if you had an existing parking lot with a building and maybe they were just changing the tenant of the building, and you were reworking some parking, but you wanted to save pavement, you would draw the line along where you're cutting the pavement and put it on there's a line type for saw cut. It's not showing up because the line type scale is probably too. I just regenerated it with using PG and then yes for it to show up. And then you could change your line type scale to like 0.5 or whatever you want it to be to match the scale of your drawing. So you would just draw this line along the pavement that you would want to cut. It's like if it was a parking lot like this maybe, and you were wanting to save this pavement over here, but you were removing this to put something else in, you would just show them where to do the saw cut. It doesn't apply to this residential project though. Show screened outlines of buildings to be demolished for reference. Also doesn't apply to this because there's no existing buildings or structures on the site. If there were, you would just want to make sure to outline the building and match our just to show where it's lines up on our proposed site plan. Be sure to delineate an area of material that needs to be replaced. That kind of goes back to the saw cut comment as well. You'd want to show what's being kept from the existing condition versus what's being proposed in our design condition. Check to ensure that the fire apparatus roads extend within 150 feet of all facilities. So for this site, we had to, since this road here is over 150 feet going this way, there had to be a fire truck turnaround provided, which we chose to use a hammerhead. And for this road, this needed to be the correct dimensions for a fire truck turnaround for a cul-de-sac. If you go to our blocks table, we have the different types of turnarounds. So like here's the hammerhead. That's dimensioned in accordance with the IFC. And then the cul-de-sac would need to be at least that big, which it looks like, yes. So both the cul-de-sac and the hammerhead were designed in accordance with the fire truck turnaround dimensions. If this road was, let's say, it wasn't 150 feet from this portion going this way, like if the road stopped here, you wouldn't need an approved turnaround at the end of the road. You could have just stopped the road here because the fire truck can back up 150 feet and get back to the main road. But since it was over 150 feet, that's why the hammerhead was provided. Check power poles and guy wires that could affect the site plan. This is very important. We'd want to make sure that there's no, large power poles or a bunch of guy wires that could be affecting the site plan. This site, it doesn't look like I went to the utility layers to check if there were any power poles or power lines on the site. Doesn't look like there are, so we're good with that. But if there were, you'd want to make sure to add the note and let the owner know that if there is a power pole that needs to be relocated, or if guy wires need to be reworked, because that can add a bunch of cost to the project. So that's going through the site plan checklist, kind of specifically for residential layout. It would change if we were to do like a commercial layout, or some of the content checklist would apply to certain projects and some of it would apply to other projects. And usually when you're finished filling out your site plan checklist, you'd want to go through it, sign it up here, and then check it off on your workflow process. And that's pretty much wraps up the site plan checklist. Thanks.